We are on problem 2-3A. We have done the journal entries and we're getting ready to post. If you look back at your journal entries, the very first journal entry we made on April 1st is to debit cash and credit Kathleen Alvarez Capital for $17,000. And you have to imagine that this posting reference column is empty. When we post, we're moving items from the journal to the ledger. Notice the journal is a chronological listing. We listed the journal entries as they occurred. The ledger, on the other hand, groups every change to a particular account. For example, cash has its own section. Accounts receivable has its own section. The advantage of the ledger is you can very quickly tell what the balance of any account is. If we only had the journal and we wanted to know how much cash we had, you'd have to go through all the journal entries and pick out the debits and the credits to cash. But if you have all that summarized in one place, it's very easy to determine the balance. So let's look at how to post. You take the first line, we're going to debit cash for $17,000. You go to the ledger and you find the cash account. It's the first account. And you write the date, April the 1st. You don't have to write anything in the item column. That'll be used in a later chapter. So right now leave that blank. The posting reference, there's also a posting reference in the general ledger. Here you're going to write where this amount we're getting ready to post comes from. And if you look back up in the journal, it was from page 1 of the journal. So your posting reference, they chose to just use a 1. You could put J1 to stand for journal page 1 or something like that. It's just showing you where the amount came from. And then if you remember, we're debiting cash for $17,000. So in the debit column, you write $17,000. And then the last two columns are balance columns. What we're going to do is every time we put either a debit or credit in here, we're going to update the balance. So at April 1st, all we have is a debit to cash of $17,000, so that's also the balance. It has a debit balance of $17,000. Notice here that the cash account is numbered account 11. So once you've written down the $17,000, then you go back to the journal, and in the posting reference column you write 11. So that tells me I posted that amount to account 11, which is cash. Then you go to the next line, Kathleen Alvarez Capital. We credited that account for $17,000. So you go to the ledger and you look for the account Kathleen Alvarez Capital. And here it is. So again, you'll write April the 1st. You don't write anything in the item column. The posting reference is 1 because that came from the journal page 1. And we're going to write a credit of $17,000, and then the balance in that account now is also a credit balance of $17,000. Kathleen Alvarez Capital is account number 31, so you go back to the journal, and in the posting reference column, you put a 31. So the last thing you do is go back to the journal and write in the posting reference. And that way, if you're posting and you have to stop for a few minutes, you'll know where you left off and you'll know where to pick back up. Because if you haven't posted it, there won't be a number there. Let's do one more journal entry and then hopefully you'll understand how to do the rest of them. The second journal entry, the debit part, we debited rent expense for $3,400. So you go to the ledger and you find the account called rent expense. Here it is. And so on April 2nd, from the journal, page 1, we're giving it a debit of $3,400. And so it has a debit balance of $3,400. It came from the journal, page 1. Notice that rent expense is account 53. So you go back to the journal, and next to rent expense, you write a 53. Whoops, went too far. Rent expense 53. And then the credit part of that journal entry, we credited cash for $3,400. And this is what I wanted you to see because this is the second amount we've posted to the cash account. If you remember from April 1st, it had a debit balance of $17,000. Now on April 2nd, from the journal, page 1, we're posting a credit of $3,400. So in the credit column, you write $3,400. To get the updated balance, before it was a debit of $17,000, and now we've given it a credit of $3,400. To balance that, you kind of treat it like it's a positive and a negative, like you're adding those together. So you're actually going to subtract the $3,400 from the $17,000, and that gives it a balance of $13,600. And it's a debit balance because the $17,000 was the debit amount. So the balance would go with the larger amount. And then again, cash is account 11. So the last thing you do is go back to the journal and you put an 11 in the posting reference column. And then you're going to do that with all of your journal entries. I'll just zip through those. You're going to post all of those to the general ledger. And then the last thing you can do is to prepare an unadjusted trial balance. The purpose of this is to make sure after you've done all these journal entries and after you have posted to the ledger that your total debits still equal your total credits. So this is Intrex Designs, the unadjusted trial balance at April 30th, 2012. Now I notice the headings are not spaced correctly. So don't let this confuse you. Where it says debit balances, that's supposed to be over the first column of numbers. And then where it says credit balances, that's supposed to be over the second column of numbers. I don't know why that's like that. And I don't know if I can fix that or not. Let me see if I can fix that before we go on. Okay, that got that fixed. I see that the totals are off as well, so let me fix that. Okay, that's got that. So what you're going to do then, you're going to go back to the ledger. There's no need to go all the way back to the journal because we already have each account summarized in the ledger. You just go back to the ledger, you write down each account in the order that it is in the ledger, and you write down the balance. So cash at the end of the month had a debit balance of $18,050. Accounts receivable had a debit balance of $1,200. Notice the order in which these accounts are listed. All of the assets are listed first, and notice they all have a debit balance. Then the liabilities are listed, notes payable and accounts payable, and those have a credit balance. Then capital is listed, it has a credit balance. Then drawing, it has a debit balance. And then your revenue account, fees earned, has a credit balance. And then all of your expenses have debit balances. So one thing to notice from the trial balance is, does each account have the normal balance that it's supposed to? And these accounts are always listed in this order. All the assets come first, then liabilities, then your capital and drawing, then the revenues, and then the expenses. And then if you'll total the debit balance column and the credit balance column, you'll see that they both equal $66,500. So they are equal, and that's the purpose of preparing the unadjusted trial balance. Let's look at the other parts of this problem for just a second. Let's see, we did part 1, we journalized the transactions. Part 2, we posted to the ledger. Part 3, we prepared an unadjusted trial balance. Part 4 wanted you to determine the excess of revenues over expenses for April. So really that's just like preparing an income statement, and you can get this off of the trial balance. Let me go back up where you can see that. The revenues, or the fees earned, was $22,000. And then if you subtract the expenses, the wages, rent, utilities, truck, and miscellaneous expenses, you end up with $11,350. That would be considered the net profit or the net income. Item 5, can you think of any reason why the amount determined in Part 4 might not be the net income for April? We really haven't gotten to this yet. This will be the topic of Chapter 3, but there could be various adjustments that need to be made to update certain accounts. So really what you would depend on to do the income statement is the adjusted trial balance. That'll be one that we'll do after we've done the adjusting entries. So that concludes the practice exercises and problems that you can hopefully use to help you complete your homework for Chapter 2.